The turkey was perfect. Golden brown, crispy skin, the whole Pinterest fantasy my Aunt Delilah had been planning for weeks. The dining room looked like a magazine spread with autumn leaves scattered across cream tablecloths and candles flickering in mason jars. Everything was exactly as it should be for our annual Mercer family Thanksgiving in Salem, Oregon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That's when my mom leaned over and whispered those 6 words that changed everything. I'm 28 years old, married to my college sweetheart James, with twin 4-year-olds who had spent the entire car ride asking if Great Uncle Theo would still have his weird glass eye. My mom, Patricia, had been unusually quiet during the 2-hour drive from Portland to my aunt's sprawling farmhouse. She kept checking her phone, drumming her fingers on her purse, and asking James to take different routes that made no sense. The Mercer family Thanksgiving was legendary in our circle. Aunt Delilah, my mom's older sister, owned a restored Victorian farmhouse with acres of apple orchards and a dining room that could seat 22 people comfortably. Every year, the entire extended family descended like a cheerful plague. Cousins, second cousins, family friends who'd been adopted into the fold over decades, and the random plus ones who never quite knew how they'd gotten roped into this Norman Rockwell fever dream. I used to love it. Growing up, this house represented everything warm and stable about family. Delilah had married well, married early, and built the kind of life that looked effortless from the outside. Her husband Marcus owned 3 successful hardware stores across the valley. Their kids, my cousins Brendan and Sophia, were star athletes with college scholarships and perfect teeth. Even their golden retriever, Buster, seemed to pose naturally for Christmas cards. My family was different. We were the renters, the ones who moved every few years when leases expired or jobs shifted. My dad, Robert, was a traveling salesman for medical equipment, which sounds more stable than it actually was. He'd be gone for weeks at a time, leaving my mom to manage everything alone. When he was home, he was either exhausted or restless, never quite settling into our temporary spaces. My mom worked as a bookkeeper for small businesses, the kind of job where you become invisible furniture in other people's offices. She was brilliant with numbers, could spot discrepancies that accountants missed, but she never pushed for more than what was offered. She accepted every situation as it came, adapted to whatever was needed, and never complained. At least not out loud. But sitting at that perfectly set Thanksgiving table, with the good china and the cloth napkins and the symphony of family voices overlapping in comfortable chaos, I realized my mom hadn't said a single word since we'd arrived 3 hours earlier. She'd hugged everyone, smiled at all the right moments, helped carry dishes from the kitchen to the dining room, but she hadn't actually spoken. Even when little cousin Emma had spilled cranberry sauce on her cream sweater, Mom just dabbed at it with club soda and smiled like it was exactly what she'd hoped would happen. Uncle Marcus was holding court at the head of the table, telling some story about outsmarting a contractor who'd tried to overcharge him for lumber. Everyone was laughing at the right beats, passing dishes clockwise as they'd done for 30 years, and debating whether the stuffing was better this year or last. My twins, Isabella and Nathan, were being remarkably well behaved, probably because they were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of adults paying attention to them. James was deep in conversation with my cousin Brendan about something tech-related that I couldn't follow. My dad was nowhere to be seen, which wasn't unusual. He often disappeared during large gatherings, claiming he needed air or wanted to check his emails. Really, I think he just got overwhelmed by the concentrated family energy and needed to recharge somewhere quiet. That's when Mom leaned close to my ear. Her voice was steady, calm, but there was something underneath it that made my stomach clench immediately. "Pack your bags. We're leaving tonight." I turned to look at her, expecting to see some hint that she was joking or maybe feeling sick. Instead, her face was completely composed, almost serene. She was cutting her turkey into precise, small bites like this was the most normal conversation in the world. "What do you mean?" I whispered back. She didn't look at me, just kept cutting, chewing, occasionally nodding at something Uncle Marcus was saying about property taxes. "After dinner.
Get James and the kids ready quietly. We'll leave around 8. Mom, what's going on? Trust me, she said, and finally met my eyes. Please, Savannah, just trust me. The thing about my mom is that she doesn't ask for trust lightly. She's not dramatic, doesn't make grand gestures or mysterious pronouncements. If Patricia Mercer says something needs to happen, it's because she's already thought through every angle and arrived at the only reasonable conclusion. She's the person you call when you need someone to read the fine print, to remember what the doctor actually said, to know exactly how much money is in the checking account without looking. So when she told me to pack our bags in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner, surrounded by family and warmth and the kind of normalcy I'd spent years trying to build for my own children, I didn't argue. I just nodded and tried to keep my face neutral while my mind started racing. The rest of dinner passed like a fever dream. I found myself watching everyone at the table with new eyes, looking for clues about what had triggered my mom's sudden urgency. Was someone sick? Had something happened with my dad? Had there been some family drama I'd missed while I was focused on keeping Isabella from launching mashed potatoes across the table? Aunt Delilah was her usual hostess self, making sure everyone had enough wine and remembering dietary restrictions that people had mentioned months earlier. Marcus was still storytelling, moving on to some elaborate tale about a fishing trip he'd taken with his business partner. My cousins were taking turns entertaining the kids with magic tricks involving dinner rolls and sleight of hand. Everything looked exactly as it always had, exactly as it should. But now it felt like I was watching it through glass, like I was already separate from it somehow. Mom continued eating methodically, occasionally adding a quiet comment to whatever conversation was flowing around us, but I could feel the tension radiating from her like heat from a radiator. James caught my eye across the table and raised his eyebrows slightly. He'd noticed something was off too, probably because I was gripping my wine glass like it might try to escape. I gave him the smallest shake of my head and tried to smile normally. Whatever this was, we'd figure it out together later. By the time Delilah started clearing the main course and talking about dessert options, my mom had already started her strategic retreat. She offered to help in the kitchen, praised the meal extensively, and began the subtle social choreography of someone preparing to leave without making it seem abrupt or rude. She was brilliant at it, actually, making all the right noises about the drive back to Portland, about getting the kids to bed at a reasonable hour, about having an early morning the next day. No one questioned it, because no one had any reason to. We were the family members who lived the farthest away, who had the youngest children, who had the most legitimate excuses for leaving before the party really got started. It was perfectly normal, perfectly reasonable. Except nothing about it felt normal to me. My mom's calm efficiency felt like watching someone defuse a bomb they'd spotted that no one else could see. And I realized, as I watched her navigate the goodbye process with masterful precision, that she'd been planning this exit strategy from the moment we'd walked through Delilah's front door. The question was why? And the bigger question was whether I really wanted to know the answer. 20 minutes later, we were loading sleeping children into car seats while the rest of the family waved goodbye from Delilah's front porch. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves. Perfect evening for a long drive back to the city, everyone agreed. Safe travels, they called out. Drive carefully. See you at Christmas. I buckled Nathan into his booster seat, his little head already nodding with exhaustion. Isabella was clutching her new stuffed elephant that Cousin Sophia had given her, mumbling something about turkey dreams. They had no idea their world was about to shift in ways I couldn't even imagine yet. James started the engine while I settled into the passenger seat, my mind still spinning from the abrupt departure. Mom had ridden with us from Portland, and now she sat in the back between the car seats, her purse clutched in her lap like it contained state secrets. The silence in the car felt thick, loaded with questions that seemed too dangerous to ask while the kids were still half awake. We drove for maybe 10 minutes before Mom spoke again. "Take the next exit," she said quietly. James glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "That's not the way back to Portland, Patricia." "I know." "Where are we going?" I asked, turning in my seat to face her. She was staring out the window at the passing farmland, her face illuminated intermittently by oncoming headlights. "Somewhere we can talk safely." The exit led to a truck stop, one of those sprawling travel centers with gas pumps and a diner that stayed open all night.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
James pulled into a parking spot far from the main building, under a broken streetlight that cast uneven shadows across the dashboard. The kids were fully asleep now, their breathing soft and steady in the sudden quiet after the engine shut off. "Okay," I said. "Talk." Mom opened her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with papers. 3 weeks ago, I was doing the monthly books for Delilah's hardware stores. I've been handling their accounting for the past 2 years. You know that. I nodded. It had been a point of pride for Mom, being trusted with Marcus's business finances. Family helping family, the way things should work. I started noticing discrepancies, small ones at first. Receipts that didn't match inventory, payments to vendors I'd never heard of, cash deposits that happened on days when the stores were closed. She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photocopied invoices and bank statements. I thought it was mistakes at first. Maybe Marcus was handling some transactions himself and forgetting to tell me. James leaned forward, studying the papers in the dim light. What kind of discrepancies? "The kind that spell money laundering," Mom said flatly. "And not small scale either. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars moving through those stores over the past 18 months. My stomach dropped. "You think Marcus is laundering money?" "I don't think anything. I know." She pointed to a highlighted section on one of the bank statements. "Look at this. $37,000 deposited on a Tuesday when the store was closed for inventory. The deposit slip says it's from cash sales, but there's no record of any sales that day. No register transactions, no receipts, nothing." I stared at the numbers, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe he's just bad at paperwork? "Savannah." Mom's voice was patient but firm. "I've been doing this for 25 years. This isn't bad paperwork. This is systematic, organized financial crime." The words hung in the air like smoke. I thought about Marcus at dinner, holding court at the head of the table, telling his stories about business deals and property investments. The successful, small-town entrepreneur who'd built something solid and legitimate. The uncle who'd paid for Brendan's college tuition without blinking, who'd bought Sophia a new car for her 16th birthday, who'd offered to help us with a down payment on a house just last year. "Who else knows about this?" James asked. "That's the problem. I think Delilah knows. Maybe not the details, but she knows something." Mom pulled out another document, this one showing large cash withdrawals from their personal account. "Look at the timing. Every time I asked her about reconciling the business accounts, she had an excuse. Computer problems, missing receipts, Marcus being too busy to deal with it. And then last week, she asked me if I'd be willing to handle some additional bookkeeping for a friend of theirs." "What kind of friend?" "Someone in the restaurant business, cash-heavy operation," she said, "needed help organizing their books for tax purposes." Mom's laugh was bitter. She offered to pay me 3 times my usual rate. I felt something cold settle in my chest. They were trying to recruit you. Or test me, see how much I'd be willing to overlook for the right price. She gathered the papers back into the envelope. That's when I knew I had to get copies of everything and figure out how deep this goes. "So you've been investigating them for 3 weeks?" James's voice was incredulous. "Patricia, this is dangerous. If they're really laundering money, they're not doing it for fun. Someone's going to notice that these records are missing." I was careful. I only copied things during regular bookkeeping sessions, nothing that would seem unusual. But today, when we walked into that house, she shook her head. Something was different. The way Marcus looked at me when I walked in, the way Delilah kept steering me away from the office when I offered to help set up. I remembered my mom's strange silence during dinner, the way she'd barely participated in conversations she normally would have dominated. "You think they suspect you know something?" "I think they know I know something, and I think tonight was supposed to be some kind of test. Maybe they were planning to approach me directly, make me an offer I couldn't refuse. Or maybe," she trailed off, staring at her hands. "Maybe what?" "Maybe they were planning to make sure I couldn't be a problem anymore." The words hit me like ice water. I thought about the warm, cozy house we'd just left, the family gathered around the table, sharing stories and laughter. The picture of suburban normalcy that had been the backdrop for every major holiday of my childhood. We have to go to the police, I said. With what? Photocopied bank statements I shouldn't have had access to? Suspicions about cash deposits? Mom shook her head. I'm not a forensic accountant. I'm just someone who noticed patterns. Any decent lawyer would tear this apart in court. Then what do we do? We disappear. Tonight. Before they realize what I figured out and decide to do something about it. I stared at her, trying to process what she was really saying. You want us to just leave? Our jobs, our house, our entire life? I want you to stay alive, she said simply, and I want those babies in the back seat to grow up with parents who aren't buried in some orchard because they got too close to the wrong family business.
James reached over and took my hand. His palm was sweating. How long have you been planning this? Since the day Delilah offered me that restaurant job. I opened a new bank account in Vancouver, Washington, transferred some money, started researching places we could go where no one would think to look for us. She pulled out a small notebook filled with her careful handwriting. I have addresses, phone numbers, job opportunities. James, that software company in Boise you interviewed with last year, they're still hiring. You called them? I called them yesterday, told them you were interested in relocating for family reasons. They want to set up a video interview next week. I felt like I was drowning in the sheer scope of what she'd organized without telling us. You've been planning our entire escape without asking if we wanted to escape. Because I knew what you'd say. You'd want to think about it, weigh the options, maybe confront them directly and try to work it out like reasonable people. Her voice was gentle but implacable. And while you were being reasonable, they'd be figuring out how to make this problem go away permanently. Through the windshield, I could see truckers moving between the pumps and the diner, people living their normal lives, while mine apparently crumbled into something unrecognizable. My phone buzzed with a text message from Delilah, thanking us for coming and hoping we'd made it home safely. We can't just abandon everything, I said. But even as I spoke the words, I knew how weak they sounded. What everything? Mom asked. Your rental apartment? James's job at a company that's laying people off every quarter? The life you've been building while struggling to pay bills and wondering if you'll ever be able to afford a real house? She wasn't wrong, and that made it worse somehow. We'd been treading water for years, building something that felt permanent but really wasn't. Maybe that's why her escape plan felt both impossible and inevitable at the same time. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Marcus. I stared at the screen, watching his name flash in the darkness of the car. Don't answer it, Mom said quietly. The phone went to voicemail, then immediately started ringing again. I declined the call and immediately turned my phone to silent. James did the same without being asked. In the sudden quiet, we could hear the distant hum of the truck stop, the occasional rumble of a semi pulling onto the highway, and the soft breathing of our children, who had no idea their lives had just changed forever. We need to move, Mom said. They'll start tracking our phones if we don't respond soon. They can do that? Marcus has a nephew who works in tech security. Brendan mentioned it last Christmas, said the kid could find anyone, anywhere, as long as they had their phone on. She was already gathering her things. We'd drive to Vancouver tonight, stay in a motel, buy new phones tomorrow, untraceable ones. The next 6 hours passed like a surreal dream. We drove through the night, stopping only for gas and coffee, while the kids slept peacefully in their car seats. Mom had cash, more than I'd ever seen her carry. She'd been preparing for this moment longer than she'd admitted, squirreling away money in small amounts over months. The motel in Vancouver was exactly the kind of place people went to disappear. Clean but anonymous, the kind of establishment that took cash and didn't ask questions. James carried the kids inside while they were still sleeping, and we settled them into one of the beds without ever waking them up. They'd remember this night as the time they got to sleep in a different bed for fun, nothing more. By morning, Mom had already been awake for hours, sitting by the window with her coffee and her notebook, making phone calls on the motel's landline. When Isabella and Nathan woke up asking for breakfast, she told them we were on a special adventure and took them to get pancakes at the diner next door, while James and I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had happened. She's been planning this for months, I said, staring at the manila envelope she'd left on the dresser. Maybe longer.
The Boise job interview isn't until Tuesday. What do we do until then? We trust her. The words came out of my mouth before I'd fully thought them through, but they felt right. She's never been wrong about anything important, ever. James nodded slowly. My mom called yesterday asking if we'd decided about Christmas at their place. Maybe we should call her back, let her know we might be coming to Idaho earlier than planned. Don't mention why, not yet. I won't, just that we're thinking about relocating and wanted to visit for a few days. The phone calls started that afternoon. First Delilah, then Marcus, then various cousins who'd been at dinner. Everyone was concerned, they said. We'd left so suddenly, and now we weren't answering our phones. Was everything okay? Had there been some kind of family emergency? Mom fielded the calls on the new untraceable phone she'd bought that morning. Her responses were masterful, I had to admit. Vague enough to avoid suspicion, but specific enough to seem genuine. James had gotten food poisoning, she told them. We'd driven straight to the emergency room in Portland, spent the night at the hospital. He was better now, but we were all exhausted and just wanted to rest at home for a few days. It bought us time, but not much. By Wednesday, when James had his video interview with the Boise company, the calls were becoming more insistent. Marcus had driven to our apartment building in Portland and discovered we weren't there. The neighbors hadn't seen us since Thanksgiving. Our landlord mentioned that someone had been asking questions about our lease. The job interview went perfectly, too perfectly almost. The company was desperate for someone with James's experience, and they were willing to offer a relocation package that seemed almost too good to be true. He could start the following Monday if he wanted. It's because they need you, Mom said when he worried it was moving too fast. Good software developers are hard to find in smaller cities. They're not being generous, they're being practical. We spent Thanksgiving weekend in a series of motels, moving every day, while Mom orchestrated our disappearance with military precision. She'd researched everything: schools for the kids, rental properties in Boise, even a pediatrician who was taking new patients. She had backup plans for the backup plans, alternative routes if the first ones didn't work out. The hardest part was explaining it to Isabella and Nathan. They were too young to understand why we couldn't go home to get their toys, why we were staying in different rooms every night, why Mommy seemed scared and Daddy kept looking over his shoulder. We told them it was a long vacation, that we were going to live somewhere new for a while, that it would be an adventure. They believed us because they had no reason not to. Children that young live entirely in the present moment, and if the present moment includes pancakes for breakfast and a different swimming pool every day, then life is good. By Sunday, we were in Boise. James's new employer had helped us find a furnished apartment on short notice, something temporary while we looked for a permanent place. It was small but clean, with a playground visible from the living room window and a grocery store within walking distance. The kids were delighted with the bunk beds in their new room. Mom stayed for 2 weeks, helping us settle in, establishing routines, making sure we felt stable before she moved on to her own new life.
She'd found a bookkeeping job in Spokane, working for a small nonprofit that helped elderly residents manage their finances. Clean work, she said. Honest work. No family connections, no complicated loyalties. The night before she left, we sat on the apartment's tiny balcony, sharing a bottle of wine while the kids slept inside. "Do you think we'll ever be able to go back?" I asked. Back to what? That life was never really ours anyway. We were just borrowing it until something better came along. But what if you're wrong? What if Marcus is just bad with money, and we've thrown away our entire lives over a misunderstanding? She was quiet for a long time, staring at the lights of the city spread out below us. 2 days after we left, the FBI raided all 3 hardware stores. Marcus and Delilah were arrested on federal money laundering charges. Turns out they were washing money for a marijuana distribution network that stretched from Canada to California. I felt the wine go sour in my mouth. How do you know that? I still have friends in Salem. People talk. She pulled out her phone and showed me a news article from the local paper. There was Marcus, in handcuffs, being led out of his own store while FBI agents carried boxes of evidence to their cars. The article mentioned that the investigation had been ongoing for months, that federal agents had been building a case based on suspicious financial activity reported by multiple sources. It mentioned that Marcus's bookkeeper had been cooperating with authorities, providing crucial evidence about the scope of the operation.
You reported them? I called the FBI the day after I found the evidence, told them everything I knew, gave them copies of all the documents. She folded the phone away. That's why we had to leave. Not because I was afraid they'd hurt us, but because I knew what was coming, and I didn't want you and the kids to be anywhere near it when it happened. I stared at her, this woman who'd raised me to be careful and quiet and never make waves. You brought down an entire criminal organization. I reported financial irregularities to the appropriate authorities. The criminal organization brought down itself. Same thing. She smiled, the first genuinely relaxed smile I'd seen from her in months. Maybe, but this way, those babies inside get to grow up somewhere clean, somewhere safe, somewhere they can build something real instead of just borrowing someone else's version of normal. 6 months later, James got promoted at his new job. The kids loved their new school, their new friends, their new grandparents who lived 20 minutes away and actually wanted to spend time with them. I found work as a freelance grant writer for local nonprofits, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the courage to pursue. We bought a house in the spring. Nothing fancy, just a 3-bedroom ranch with a big backyard and room for a garden. The first house we'd ever owned, the first place that was truly ours. Isabella planted sunflowers along the fence. Nathan learned to ride his bike on the quiet street out front. Mom visited for the housewarming party, bringing homemade cookies and a bottle of champagne. She looked different, lighter somehow. The worry lines around her eyes had softened, and she laughed more easily than I remembered. Any regrets? I asked her as we stood in my new kitchen, watching James teach the kids how to make s'mores in the backyard fire pit. Only that I waited so long to trust my instincts, she said. I spent so many years trying to make other people's version of family work that I almost forgot what real family actually looks like. I watched my children running around their own backyard, safe and happy and free from the complicated loyalties that had defined my childhood. It looks like this, I said. She nodded. Yeah, it looks exactly like this. The criminal trial lasted 8 months. Marcus was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Delilah got 6 years and had to forfeit their house, their businesses, everything they'd built with money that was never really theirs. The local news coverage was extensive, detailing how a small-town hardware store owner had become the central figure in a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation. I never felt sorry for them, not even a little bit. Because the night my mom whispered those 6 words at Thanksgiving dinner, she wasn't just saving us from their criminal empire. She was giving us permission to build something better, something that belonged to us, something clean. And that, I realized, was worth more than all the perfect family dinners in the world. 3 years have passed since that Thanksgiving dinner changed everything. The kids are 7 now, tall enough to reach the kitchen counter, old enough to understand that the move to Boise wasn't just an adventure, but a fresh start their grandmother orchestrated to keep them safe. They know Uncle Marcus is in prison, though we've kept the details age-appropriate. Bad choices, we tell them. Sometimes adults make bad choices and have to face consequences. James was promoted to senior developer last month, leading a team of 12 people building software for agricultural management systems. It's meaningful work, helping farmers optimize their crops and reduce waste. He comes home energized instead of drained, talking about problems worth solving instead of corporate politics he can't navigate. I've built my grant writing business into something substantial. Local nonprofits depend on my work to secure funding for literacy programs, food banks, and youth services. Last week, I helped a small organization get a $100,000 grant to provide after-school tutoring for kids whose parents work multiple jobs. The kind of work that makes you feel like you're contributing something real to the world. Mom visits every few months, usually staying for a week at a time. She's dating someone now, a retired teacher named Frank who volunteers at the animal shelter and makes her laugh until she snorts. It's strange seeing her this happy, this comfortable in her own skin. Sometimes I catch her playing with the kids in the backyard and realize I'm seeing a version of my mother I never knew existed. The house has become exactly what we hoped it would be. Isabella's sunflowers grow taller every summer, creating a golden wall along our back fence. Nathan has a tire swing now, hanging from the oak tree that was here when we bought the place. We host neighborhood barbecues, help with school fundraisers, and know our mail carrier's name. The kind of ordinary, rooted life that felt impossible when we were constantly moving between rental apartments and temporary situations. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed. If Mom had kept her suspicions to herself, continued doing Marcus's books while pretending not to notice the patterns that didn't add up. Would we have been collateral damage when the FBI finally moved in? Would the kids have grown up thinking criminal behavior was normal as long as it paid for nice houses and college tuition? I'm grateful we'll never have to find out. Because trusting my mother's instincts that night gave us something precious and rare, something worth more than all the family traditions and holiday gatherings we left behind. It gave us the chance to build our own version of normal, based on honesty instead of appearance, genuine connection instead of obligation. The funny thing is, we have better Thanksgivings now. Smaller, simpler, but infinitely more authentic. Just the four of us around our kitchen table, grateful for food we bought with money we earned honestly, in a house we own outright, surrounded by relationships we've chosen instead of inherited. And when I watch my children laugh over their mashed potatoes and argue about who gets the last dinner roll, I know my mother made the right choice. She saw danger where everyone else saw family, recognized corruption disguised as success, and had the courage to act on that knowledge, even when it meant losing everything familiar. That's the kind of mother I want to be. The kind who trusts her instincts over appearances, who chooses her children's safety over social expectations, who understands that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from the life everyone else thinks you should want. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.